Hello and welcome to the WorkJoy Jam podcast. I'm your host, Beth Stallwood, and in this episode, I was joined by the wonderful Dr Lizzy Bernthal. And Lizzy has such an incredible career, 40 years worth of being a nurse, being a midwife, being in the NHS, spending 25 years in the army, doing a PhD, doing research, and she's now taken all of that wonderful experience of life and she's on a mission to get rid of toxicity in the workplace by enabling, empowering leaders and individuals to really step into their authentic selves. And there's some great thinking from Lizzy around unpicking some of the stories that we hold that don't need to be there anymore, that aren't true, and some tips and techniques for really stepping into yourself, into your authenticity, and being able to find that joy at work. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. I know I did. Well, welcome to the WorkJoy Jam podcast. I'm your host, Beth Stallwood, and today I'm so excited to be joined by Dr Lizzy Bernthal. And when I met Lizzy before we are talking today, I was so excited about her philosophy and her career and all the amazing things she's done that I was like, you have to come on the WorkJoy Jam podcast. And she agreed, and she's right here, right now. So, Lizzy, can you give us a little summary of who you are, what you do, and maybe a little bit of how you got to where you are today, because it's such an interesting story.
Oh, well, thank you. And it's so exciting to be here too. I just connected and there we are. So fantastic. Yes. So I think, it's interesting when you say interesting. Sometimes we just think we just do what we do. And I think that's a really good reflection for a lot of people listening, because I bet you a lot of your listeners won't even think, oh gosh, I've done some really good stuff. You just think, well, I've just done it and that's what I've done and that's it. So I take me back to when I was born. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through my day-by-day life history. The only reason I'm saying that is I was born 60 years ago now, I feel I'm just getting started. So 60 years ago, I was born at 28 weeks with a 5% chance of survival.
Wow.
Now, the only reason I'm saying that is I think from that moment I was born, I thought, right, I'm going to do things differently. I'm just going to show the world what I can do. Not obviously realizing when I was lying in that cot, but anyway, and that's been my philosophy all my life, is just grab every opportunity. And if there's not one there, create it. That's been my philosophy for life. So yeah, obviously, I trained to be a midwife and a nurse in the NHS, having traveled around the world. My father was in the army. Was eighth generation army, so I was brought up with that army career, so never really know where I'm from, because I've lived in 18 countries, so I'm not sure where home is. It's always where you live, that's home. So trained to be a nurse and a midwife in the NHS. And then I was itching to get abroad. So I worked in the Middle East and the Far East, which I absolutely loved. And then at the very late age for army life, I joined the army at 31. And I stayed in the army for 25 years, having joined originally for only 3 years. And had the most incredible career, from starting off working as a midwife in military hospitals around the world and deploying and so forth, and then moving into research, which was fascinating for me because I was told at school that I wasn't intelligent enough for university. So, go and do your nurse training. I was also told at school, actually, you're rubbish at sport, be very enthusiastic, but you're no good. So I assumed that was the case too. And then within a few months of joining the army, I realized, maybe I could run and maybe I could swim. And I ended up swimming and running for the army, and ended up with my career as a PhD and a senior lecturer at University of Birmingham. So my big lesson for this is never believe what you're told. And actually, if anybody puts a hurdle in front of you, just think, well, just going to jump higher. What's the challenge? So that's a bit of a brief summary.
It's a very quick summary for a very interesting, fantastic career. And that thing, isn't it? I hear it so many times. And I imagine that you must, in your world as well, hear this. Somebody told me something when I was a child, and in some ways we believe that to be true just because we've been told it. That whole idea that someone says you can't go to university and you're not good enough at sport, and then you end up being a lecturer at university and playing sport for the army.
Exactly. And also told I wouldn't have children. And we've got a gorgeous 20-year-old who's now living the life as university herself. So yeah, it's sort of all full circle. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think, as you say, absolutely. And that's where I, do so much work with clients, is unpicking their sort of thoughts and beliefs and stories they've made up in childhood that becomes their reality when they're just stories.
Yeah. And actually that unpicking and how do we get past some of those things is such an interesting thing to do. And I'm going to go there in a minute. I've got loads of questions for you, if that's all right.
Of course. Love it. Yeah, love it.
So how do you go from being a midwife, nurse, into being a lecturer at a university and having a PhD? That for me sounds like a big transition. And I'd love to know what sparked that. How did you get into it? And how did that career change come about?
Yeah, well, again, it was that philosophy, just grab every opportunity. So in about 2000, midwives were no longer, all midwifery went to the NHS. So I had to retrain in, I was very sad to leave midwifery. However, I joined I did an operating theatre course because I worked with caesarean sections and ladies having caesarean sections. So it's sort of, I had that familiar environment. So I did another qualification to train to be a theatre nurse. And as part of that, I was doing my theatre nursing course. And on our last assignment, I was asked to stay back. And classic, naughty student thinking, oh my goodness, I'm in trouble, just reminds me of the red ink at school, which will straight way back to that, oh my goodness, that moment when the teacher tells you not good enough. And yeah, much to my shock, it was, your assignments are so good, we want you to be published. And I thought, what? So wow. I was invited to publish one of my assignments, which I did. It caused quite a rumpus, and I ended up being interviewed on the radio for it. And that set me off on a bit of a academic, not even an academic journey at that point. And then there was an opportunity in the army to do a degree. So I thought, oh, well, and I was really in awe of doing any academic study, thinking, well, I've been told I can't, but I'll give it a go. And much to my shock, I got a first in 9 months.
What?
On the top of a busy career military job as well. I was sort of doing 2 modules at once, and so that really shocked me. And as part of the degree, I thought, right, I'm going to set myself a target. I'm going to see if I can publish every assignment. So yes, I did. I published every assignment. And then I got invited to be on an editorial team for a nursing journal. And then it seemed a natural progression. At that point, nurses were just starting to be funded for masters. So I applied for that, and again, amazed, got some funding for that. And then 2 modules into my masters, my supervisor came up to me and said, Lizzy, I really think you should be stopping your masters. I think you should be doing your PhD. I thought, well, this is crazy. So yeah, I thought, great, of course, thank you very much. At the time, no, nurses were not being funded to do PhDs at all. It was only doctors. I felt that was absolutely wrong. So I put up a case that it was a reputational risk and nurses should be funded to do PhDs. And by the way, if you're going to fund them, maybe I could be the first one. And yeah,
it's like I'm fighting for the cause, but I'd like to be part of this cause, please.
Yes, exactly. And interestingly, I felt a huge number of hurdles in the way. And I overcome them. And I think what was the most amazing thing was when I left the army in 2018, one nurse has been funded every year to do a PhD. So it was just a lovely legacy to leave behind. And I didn't even realise it was a legacy. I just thought I just sort of did what I did. And then my dining out dinner, somebody came up to me and said, Lizzy, you do realise the legacy you've created of academia for nurses in defence? And I thought, no, it didn't even occur to me. I just was really excited that nurses were having the opportunities. And as part of that, I was also I created a journal for nurses to get published, and I helped them get speaking at conferences when they'd never spoken before. And I just loved the mentoring. And as I left the army, I acknowledged that I just wanted to give people a voice. And part of my PhD was interesting as well, because I was encouraged to look at something relating to the soldier. And I said, no, there's so much research on the soldier. So yet again, I put my head above the parapet. I said, no, we really need to support military families, because at the time Afghanistan was at its height, and it was pretty grim, with soldiers being killed on a daily basis. And so that was a real privilege to support military families to get their voice heard. And I ended up going around the world speaking about it, because other countries in defence were really interested. And as a result of that, I was appointed chair of nursing for the International Committee of Military Medicine. Wow. And travelled around the world supporting nurses with their empowerment, particularly in countries where they had a real rough time, because they had the nurse doctor thing, they had the male female thing, and they had the rank thing. And then the final extraordinariness was when I was appointed Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy for my contribution to higher education globally. So it's a story I just can't even believe when I say it, really.
But all kind of snowballing from this, let's try it, let's give it a go.
Yeah, it's everything I've done in life. It's just, I even remember, when I joined the army and there was some athletics training, and I thought, oh God, I can't go there because it's too embarrassing, because I'm rubbish at sport. But yeah, no, I just want to get fit. I'll just go just to get a bit fitter. And blow me down, he saw something in me that I'd never realized and didn't know. And so so yes, you just never know. I think that's what my biggest philosophy is to everyone I meet, is just go for it. And if it doesn't go the way you planned, who cares, because you've given it a go.
Yeah. And so your PhD, when you were kind of working through this, doing the research, you focused it on families. Was there a particular topic that you really kind of got into and yes, really wanted to help people with?
Yeah. So interestingly, at the time, I was working as in a big medical centre, and at the time we were providing the out of hours service for all the families in the health centre I was working in. And at the time, then suddenly there was a consolidation of the NHS, for want of a better word, and it was decided that the out of hours had to go to the NHS. And as a result, the NHS, quite rightly, out of hours to the NHS is, can it wait till the next day? In which case it can wait till the next day. If it's an emergency, yes, we'll see you. However, we within the army and the military, we were very much there providing compassionate support and psychological support. So we knew for a fact that, a very stressed mother with husband deployed, not knowing if she's going to see him again, would come in saying, oh, poor Johnny's got a really sore throat. But you knew full well it was nothing to do with a sore throat. She was just at the end of her tether. And so suddenly that whole support network just vanished. And I felt really strongly about this. So I wanted to give them a voice to say, this is what the reality is of being a family during deployment. And the outcome was fascinating, because I highlighted their decision-making, I suppose, because of my health background, and what their decision-making changed dramatically during deployment. So when their husband or their partner was around, they were very disparaging about his decision-making ability, but the fact he was there helped them be calm. So they went through every possible opportunity before they called the out of hours. They'd phone their mum, they go to this chemist, they'd look on Google, etc., etc. And if nothing else worked, then they'd go to out of hours. What happened was, as soon as their husband wasn't there or their partner wasn't there, they short-circuited straight to out of hours.
Yeah.
Now, this had a massive, it does have a massive impact on local health provision, because a regiment, when they deploy, the whole regiment deploys at once. So for 6 months, you've suddenly got 400 single parent families in a goer, in a oneer.
Yeah.
So consequently, that has a massive impact on the local health provision, where suddenly you find you've got 400 families that might need you hugely much, much more than they would if everything's normal. So yeah, so I think that was partly why the interest. I think the other thing that was interesting for me doing the research was because I was very privileged. They were very honest with me, partly because I was serving at the time, my husband was serving at the time. I'd experienced deploying, leaving my daughter, not knowing if I was ever going to see her again, to Afghanistan, and I'd been left at home with her while my husband deployed. So I'd done the whole gambit of being left and going, and knowing the impact on both sides of the whole story.
Yeah. And I think that you think about the level of underlying stress that creates.
Yeah,
you can totally appreciate why in those situations then you are going to need more support for those people, because you've suddenly become, you've suddenly become a single parent family, and the partner is somewhere dangerous, is somewhere where you don't know what's going on all the time, you don't have all that contact, you don't have someone else there to talk you off a cliff if you're kind of having a moment. I can totally appreciate that. And then so get the research, and then obviously the research has then sparked this global, international, going and helping other countries look at this as well. And how was that experience for you, kind of going from doing the research to going to actually, how do we help people with this side of things?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's fascinating. That, unfortunately, it didn't get very far. I mean, it got far in the fact, I literally did physically go far. So that was amazing. Traveling to, Canada and all around the world in that respect. So that was amazing. It's interesting that while there was a great interest in military families, there wasn't great funding interest.
Wow.
And so that was a perpetual problem. So the research that we didn't really get any further internationally, but there's a lot in UK, so that's been great. There's been lots of research in UK.
And obviously this legacy that you've then left, that there are many other nurses now working through PhDs and research. And
in fact, it's great, because actually I found out last week, because I left, as I say, in 2018. I found one of the girls I first mentored she's now got her PhD. So it's wonderful to hear that they're all, all of those that I started to support when I was in the army are all now coming through, having got their PhDs, been awarded their PhD. So it's fantastic.
That must be lovely to see that legacy come to life. Even I imagine that you didn't sit there as a, when you were first doing your nursing training and going, do you know what I'm really going to do? I'm going to do a PhD and then mentor other people doing their PhDs. It might not have been exactly what you planned.
Well, no nurses were doing PhDs then. And I remember actually, before I even started my degree, I met a nurse who had a PhD, and I could hardly speak to her because I was so awe that any nurse should even think about a PhD, that the fact that she must have a brain like a planet. And I can honestly guarantee you do not have to have a brain like a planet. You just have to be determined. And this is.
Yeah. And, take the opportunity and believe in yourself to be able to do it.
Yeah, although having said that, it was interesting. I now reflect on it, and actually I think it was fear of failure that drove me to think it.
It drove you to success, though, that fear, if that was the way you did it.
Exactly.
It's like, I've campaigned for this and made it happen. I now actually have to do something about it.
I can't be the first one that falls on the hurdle to say, well, it clearly doesn't work, and that's it, end of story. So, yeah. So,
nursing career in the NHS, nursing career in the army, doing the PhD, doing the research while still kind of being in the army. What's happened since then? So obviously you left the army in 2018. What are you up to now?
Oh, so I'm so passionate about it, as you know. So I realized when I was leaving the army, there's two things happened here. Number one, I looked at my career and realized I as I say, I really wanted to give them a voice. And the process of that, I didn't always feel I had my own voice. So while I was out doing my stuff, I loved it, and I was really had my voice supporting others, but not only always my own. And that was twofold here. Number one, I did get exposed to toxicity, and I appreciate 100% that wasn't their fault. I was a victim and I didn't realize it. So at a meeting one day, I just stood up and said, enough's enough. And I found my voice that day. And that moment was when I said, right, when I leave the army, I will make sure that I will do all I can to get rid of toxicity in the workplace. Yeah. So that suddenly became my mission. And that was my mission. And then as I was reflecting what to do next, it just seemed a natural progression to train to be a coach, because I realized that whether it was supporting patients in the early days or students, supervising students, and even in my research, it was all actually coaching conversations that I didn't realize were coaching conversations.
Yeah, you just fallen into it in that way.
So it just seems totally a natural progression. So I trained with the ICF to do my coaching qualification, and that's it. And I'm just so passionate. I love it, and I just want everyone I meet to realize they've got everything within them. They're whole and complete. Nothing's broken. Sometimes it just takes those conversations to realize it.
Yeah. And when we spoke and we were talking about this whole idea that we're all enough. We're all, we're not broken. We don't need to fix ourselves. And on the other side of things, thinking about this idea of getting rid of toxicity in the workplace, there are some places that aren't good for you. There are places out there that aren't good. But you, as an individual, you're not necessarily going to be able to fix them, but you can work on things yourself. And I'd love to know a little bit more about this idea of helping people the philosophy for me is totally aligned with WorkJoy and everything that we talk about in WorkJoy, and that actually you can make decisions, you can do things, you can work through challenges, but actually you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. There is going to be different things that you can do. So tell me a little bit more about your approach and how you help people in this world, because I think our listeners, I think many of them I think many people have experienced some toxicity in their workplaces, whether that's on a small scale occasionally or on a, wow, this place just really isn't great. I'd love to know a little bit more about how you work through some of those challenges.
Yeah. As you say, unfortunately, it is way too rough. And I know this is not research from a researcher. I did do a poll on LinkedIn, and 92% said they'd been exposed to toxicity. Now, it could be they're the ones that answered, but I think it's very, unfortunately, far too high. It shouldn't be at all. Yes. So, and interesting, because I'm passionate about resilience and confidence. I think probably because I needed a lot of that in myself, and I share practical tools and techniques that I've used in my life, and I use every day today, and going to Afghanistan and places like that. So generally, those that want to explore with me are those who are actually really confident, really authentic leaders that just feel they just can't show up in the boardroom, or they feel they've got how they describe as a tricky boss. And what transpires from that is actually they have been exposed to toxicity, and as a result, they've lost their confidence. They don't often realize they're exposed to toxicity. They just think they're not good enough, and that they're just not up to the job, all the imposter syndrome stuff. And then what's so magic is unpicking some of that stuff, and they suddenly own who they are, realize they're whole and complete. And then they just saw, and I've had clients who've been promoted twice during the program. I've had them been headhunted, all sorts of really amazing things, because suddenly they show up powerfully. They haven't got the handbrake on. And so that's really, really incredible to see, and such a privilege. How I do that is obviously the practical tools and techniques that you can put in place straight away. So from the practical stuff is how to show up powerfully to meeting, skills you can do day to day to show up powerfully. I do an awful lot, which is the most deep stuff, which is really powerful, is exploring those stories from childhood, as we alluded earlier. So what stories are you making up? And it could be something, it doesn't have to be painful, because your subconscious will only release stuff when it's ready, as you know. It won't just come, it doesn't have to be painful. So for example, on a simpler level, it could be that we find that when they were 7, they put their hand up in a maths class, and the teacher told them either they should know that or they were wrong. And then they think, oh, I best not put my hand up again. And the result, they can't speak up powerfully in a boardroom 30, 40 years later. And so that's, once we unpick that story and join the dots, it's, whoa, okay, right. Okay, let's just get rid of that. And I always talk about gardening. I do a lot of gardening. I pluck out those weeds that you don't even know they're there. so then they can flourish. I mean, obviously, sadly, sometimes it's more sinister. It could be sexual abuse or whatever. But the whole of all this is that as a child, you assume, like we all did, your parents, teachers, those sort of hierarchy, you know, that level above us, they've got life sus. They know it all. They've got it, understand it. They're the heroes in our life. And when they do something that we don't expect or doesn't quite fit in with that hero, we think, oh, must be me. If I was good enough, if I was okay, they wouldn't have done that to me. And as a result, that story starts building. And then subconsciously, they just collect evidence wherever it happens. And you find they're getting divorced, and it's because their parents got divorced. And therefore, if I'd been a good girl or a good boy, my parents wouldn't have got divorced. I can't have relationships. Or, you know, I know it's all deep and subconscious, but these are the stories that we make up as children that show up in our lives for the rest of our lives if we don't unpick them.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't even know they're there, right? We have no idea until somebody asks us a really important question, or we suddenly go, why am I still believing this? What is that all about? And like your story has it there perfectly, doesn't it? That you know,
I was that person.
You were that person. And I always think that when, you know, people become coaches, you've got that life experience and you've been through it yourself, and you've worked through it, and you've worked through those challenges, and whether it was determination or fear of failure that drove you to be able to work through it, you found a way, and now you're helping people to find their way through these things.
It's such a privilege.
And tell me a little bit about, obviously, the toxicity in the workplace is a real challenge. What themes do you pick up from the people that you work with about the biggest sources of that kind of toxicity? Because it can come in many different ways, right?
Yes, I think that the challenging one is when they don't realize it's happening. Now, we can all spot a bully. We can always spot somebody that's screaming and shouting in the office, and that's clearly unacceptable. Most of my clients, it's much more subtle. Where they don't necessarily realize it's going on, and because their self-esteem gets eroded, and they do, quite like I did, just slip into that victim mentality, not even realizing they're a victim, because all they're doing is pedaling harder and harder and working harder and harder just to prove they're okay, when in fact there's nothing to prove. And I also talk a lot about fitting in versus belonging, because interestingly, most of my clients, in fact all of them, I would say, are desperate to fit in, like we all are. It's a fundamental need not to be rejected by the tribe from, you know, millions of years ago, when we wouldn't get the lion's share and be thrown out and die. So we all have that fundamental fear of rejection. So if their boss, their colleagues, whatever, are not treating them as they hope they would be, they feel that it must be them, and they have that fear of rejection. So and it's so easy to focus on ourselves, to think, I'm not good enough, I don't want to be rejected, so I will just work harder, and I want to please people more. So people pleasing and be perfect are a really dominant working style for all my clients, until we start picking it, and then, you know, give them strategies to stop it and just say, no, you don't need it anymore.
You don't need to do that. It's not necessary. That people pleasing one is such an interesting area to think about, because I find that if you get into that zone, people end up like shape shifting and trying to be somebody that they're not, and then trying to please everyone else, and never thinking about, hang on a minute, how do I please myself in this situation? And when I think about WorkJoy, I think about actually putting yourself near the top of the list, because if you're leading from a really good place, if you're feeling good about yourself and your work, that helps other people and it stops it being that kind of toxic world. Because I think a lot of the toxic world comes from other people who haven't sorted out their own stuff and their own stories.
Always. And in fact, I'm on a mission to get rid of it, not through just getting rid of it. I'm on a mission to help leaders feel so tall and so empowered that there's no place for it.
Yeah.
That actually there's nothing to exist, because we can only get bullied, we can only be a bully ourselves if we feel there's something wrong with us. Once we own who we are, and going back to the belonging versus the fitting in, the thing about fitting in is actually it's the opposite of belonging.
Yeah.
Because when you're, as you've alluded to, when you want to fit in, you're desperate to fit in, you're actually betraying who you are, because you're spending all your time trying to be that chameleon, to be the person they want you to be. Once you belong to you and that individual, you can only belong to you, can't belong to anyone else. You don't care what other people think, because you're okay.
Yeah.
And so you show up differently, you show up empowered, you help your team be empowered, and the world's a much better place.
Yeah. And I know from my own experience and my own story of life and where things have come from is the times I've stepped into being myself fully and being okay with being myself are the times I have been most joyful, got promoted, had opportunities come my way, had great teams, had a great time at work. And I think there's something about the difference between that belonging side of things and the empowered side of things. And for me, fitting in definitely fits in with victim mentality. Sometimes it's I have to do this, I have to shape it, someone else is making me do this zone, versus that empowered, it's okay if I'm a bit different, it's okay if I step up and say something different, if I want to try a way of being happier here. So I definitely feel that is a really important thing to do, but it's also not an easy thing to do, right? It's not something that we can just go today, right now, I'm going to stop feeling like a victim and I'm going to be empowered. Right, great, ready to go.
Yeah, and I think it's always having the awareness, isn't it? As soon as you have and I talk a lot about language, and I'm all about energy, and I talk a lot about notice how your body feels, because we know when we feel great, when we feel empowered, we just feel free, we feel open, we feel expansive. As soon as we start using the shoulds and the must to and the have tos, which is in morality, where we're obviously making ourselves and other people wrong, it just feels heavy. We've got that burden on our back. So once you notice how your body feels and think, okay, what's going on here? What's the story? And I talk about what's the story between the story. What fear is this overrunning? It's generally, classic fear of failure, abandonment, rejection, etc. What is that fear I'm feeling right now? Okay, well, what reality, what story am I making up here? And then that things can then change.
And you can feel it, right? The days where you feel the joy versus the gloom, you can feel that difference physiologically and mentally. And that language stuff, I have a great friend who always calls it, are you shoulding all over yourself?
Exactly. I do that too. Exactly.
It's like, yeah. I should do this, I should do that. I'm like, no one has ever jumped out of bed with joy to do something they should do.
Exactly.
Never. It's never happened. What I have no research to back this up, obviously, Lizzie. Don't have.
No, but I would totally.
I've never experienced anybody in my life who goes, oh yeah, I'm going to get out of bed because I really should do that.
Yeah, but if I choose to, yes, I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm choosing to lie in bed for 10 minutes. I'm choosing to get up at 5 a.m. because I want to see the sunset, or sunrise rather. So you talk a lot about language, because choosing, changing words, getting rid of but, getting rid of try, getting rid of have tos and the shoulds. It can be transformational just by noticing the words that you're using and picking each other up on it. I get clients to have a family pact. Do not pick me up if I say it, and I'll pick you up if you say it.
Because it's easy, right? It's easy to say, oh, I'll try and do that this weekend. And you're like, well,
try.
It's obviously not going to happen, is it?
Only rugby. You can only use try if you're talking about rugby.
That's the only acceptable form of...
Because trying is lying. Any more than comparing is despairing.
Yeah. And that comparatitis of, you know, lives and where people are at is a surefire way to get a load of gloom in your life, isn't it? Comparing yourself to other people versus your own journey.
Yes. And I always talk about, you know, don't compare your chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 20, because you never know what they've been through to get to where they've got. But please just don't.
Yeah. And I say the same thing about, don't compare your inside thoughts with other people's external postings of what they have in their lives.
Absolutely.
Because internally, you know, there's very few people who post on there, I had a bit of a rubbish day today and couldn't be asked to get out of bed. There's not that many people who post on social media with things like that, but you're comparing your inside thoughts to their outside thoughts, and that's not going to help.
Yeah, exactly.
And
perfect.
I think this idea that people are on their own pathway, they're on their own way, and different things happen at different times for different people, and, you know, opportunities and different ways of seizing some of these things. And obviously you've got a great story about seizing opportunity and taking it and kind of going, I could do this, I could make this happen, whatever was driving that. And I think when we're in victim mode, we don't see the wood for the trees on what the actual opportunity is.
Yes, and I always talk about switching it. I literally get clients to have a coin on their desk as a reminder, because switch it. So if you say, oh, I can't, well, what if you can, you know? And so I think it's when you feel that you're saying something disempowering, how can you completely switch it to make it empowering? Oh, I've got to work on a Sunday morning. Oh, I choose to work on a Sunday morning because I've got a new client, or whatever it is, you know. So it's flipping that thinking, and then it starts to become much more natural to do it, and you can do it in seconds.
Yeah. And it's having those little, you know, physical token you've got there in that thing to remind you that you don't have to keep going down that same path. You can decide to flip it.
Yeah.
And if you flip it and you think it's, oh, but actually I still don't like it, you can choose to do something about it.
Exactly. And action always solves everything.
Yeah. I always say one step forward feels way better than standing still. Like just one tiny step forward. Standing still is horrible. It feels stuck and icky. But even if you make a little tiny move, it can make a massive difference to how you feel about things.
Yes. And I always talk about the familiar zone, never the comfortable zone, because the comfort zone is actually never comfortable. Actually, when you're in the comfort zone, it's because you're resisting going a step forward, and that can feel horrible as well.
Yeah because it doesn't feel like growth, it doesn't feel like development, it doesn't feel like learning, it doesn't feel like, it might feel safe in a very kind of way,
unsafe way.
Because that, again, if you then get into the comfort zone and you're comparing yourself to other people who are still moving and you're stuck, that does feel terrible.
It's horrible.
Oh, I love that. The little coin one, I love. It's a great idea. I think people will probably take that one as a little thing to think about. It's like, how do I flip this around and change the story that's going on in my head right now?
Yes. And the other thing I encourage them to do is find a photograph of themselves when they were a child.
Oh, okay.
So that they have their screensaver on their phone or wherever, or by their desk, so that actually every time they notice they're beating themselves up, they look at that little picture of that really little girl, little boy, and imagine that they were talking to another child, and they would never say the things they're saying in their head out loud to a little girl or a little boy.
No. They'd be saying, come on, you can do it, give it a try.
Exactly. Or if it's sometimes it's too painful to have their own picture if they've had a traumatic childhood. So in which case, you know, a niece or a nephew or a friend's little girl or boy, you know, a child that's really significant in their life.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great idea. Also, I always find when you look back at photos, they're always slightly funny. Like you've always got that kind of, I remember maybe what was happening at that time, or oh look, the 1980s glasses that I was wearing as a child were not particularly cool, or, you know, there's all these things that you give yourself a little bit of a memory about, right?
In fact, I was quite shocked because I've been of a certain age. I've started wearing reading glasses when I want, and I've got some reading glasses. And actually, when I thought, well, I best practice what I preach, I found a picture of myself age 2.5. Oh my goodness, my glasses are almost exactly the same.
You see, fashion comes back round, doesn't it? I love it. Love it. This is it's such an, I think you've had such an interesting career and an interesting life and taking all those opportunities. And now tell me a little bit about, for you, I'm gonna go into some quick fire questions if you're all right with it.
Yeah.
Tell me, first question is always this one. What is it for you that brings you some work joy in the work that you're doing now? And I imagine you have many different versions of this from your life, but I'd love to know right now, if I was going to say, pick one thing, what gives you some work joy? What would it be?
Oh, it's just supporting clients and seeing them have those massive light bulb moments. It's just the most biggest gift. Then suddenly just the light bulbs go off. It's just wonderful. Wonderful.
I love that. And next question for you. What are you currently reading? Book or audio book or whatever version of taking in some content? What are you up to in that world?
Yeah, no, I'm always listening to something. I always have several things on the go, which is probably not, I should be monotasking, not multitasking, which I support my clients. One book I think everyone should read is called, and we all know obviously the Brainy Browns and all the ones we all love, but this one I found fantastic. It's called Who Not How by Dan Sullivan.
Ooh.
And why this is so magical is because we, particularly from school onwards, we're always taught how to do things. This book just flips it all around, and it's all about who can we help to do this with us. And we all need who's in our lives. We don't need the how. We can learn the how. So we all need a who, whether it's a mentor, whether it's somebody to do our admin, or whether it's actually having a team, like a tribe of people that are there to support us, that are advocates and fight, there for us when we need some support. So it's all about finding your who, because the how will then come, and all about outsourcing your weaknesses and building your genius. Because when you're building your genius, it's joy. Time just vanishes.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the who. I've not read the book, but the theory of work out who is in your squad, work out who you've got, build that, invest in the relationships, because they're the things that tide you through both good times and bad times. We don't celebrate or commiserate on our own very often, do we? It's something that we do together with people. Outsourcing your weaknesses and that whole, do the things you're good at, do the things where you are in your zone with it, makes such a difference to how we feel about life. But I'm gonna have a little look at that one, Who Not How. I love a good book recommendation. And
I think if you think of, I love tennis, but if you look at tennis players, they have a huge number of people helping them do the who. They have nutritionists, they have, never mind the coach and the psychologists and everyone else, they've got a huge number of who's that if they weren't there, they would not be at the top of their game.
Yeah, I love it. Question 3. What's the best or most useful bit of advice that somebody has given to you in your lifetime that you always find yourself coming back to?
I think it's probably just grab every moment, really. I don't even remember being told that, but I think my father lived that. And as a child, you sort of follow what others do rather than necessarily what they say.
Yeah.
So
you had the role model there for it.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
And it certainly sounds like you've really lived that motto.
Yes, some of those things I still haven't done, which I think, I should have done that. I start shoulding on myself. I haven't run a marathon. Should have done a marathon by now. But then I catch myself, think, well, I've done other things instead. You can't do everything.
Yeah, I'm sure I remember you telling me that you ran for the army at some point.
Yes, exactly.
You might not have run a marathon. There's quite a lot of other stuff that you've done.
I used to do 100, 200 meters. It's over much, much more quickly than a marathon.
Yeah, I love that. So and actually that's the thing, isn't it? People don't have to actually tell you it, but what are you learning from others? How are you using their inspiration, even if it's not a direct bit of advice? Like, what are they? What do you see around you that you can then take and use and work with? Brilliant. Grab every moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Was that another question?
No. I'm gonna go for another one. I have got another one.
Yeah.
And I think this one's going to be quite hard because I think you've probably got about 4 million of them. But what's one super practical bit of advice to our listeners that's something they could go and do now, tomorrow, something easy that would really change how they felt, how they showed up, how they stepped into their own power?
Yeah, I think well, there's, as you say, there's loads of them. I think when you first wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and say, either I love myself, which for some it's too difficult to start with, I'm okay. And the first question I think is great to ask yourself, if you don't want to go down that route, is how am I going to be today? What's the best version of me today? And I have that on my bathroom mirror. So the first thing I see when I go into the bathroom in the morning is how can I be the best me today?
Yeah. And what I quite like about that as a sentence is it doesn't actually put loads of pressure on you, does it?
No, because it could be, how can I be the best me today? Oh, maybe I will go to the gym today after all. It doesn't mean to say you've got to suddenly change the world.
No.
It's just, what is the best me today? Yeah, best me today is to say, I'll do what I know would be helpful for me to do, or whatever. So there's no boundary. I think that's what's great about it. I'm not saying, right, now ring 500 people because you've got to build a business or whatever. I'm saying, what would the best version of me do today?
Yeah. And that best version of you today might be that you're not having the best day, because we all have ups and downs. And the best version of you today could be, I'm going to be the version that takes a nap and invests in some rest and allows myself a little bit of space not to be trying to do too much. Or it could be do you know what? The best version of me today is going to change the world, and I'm going to go and do something really powerful. Or the best version of me today is I'm going to help one of my friends out because they really need to, it allows for a really wide range of things, and without judging yourself for it as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because the best me for today might be very different to the best me yesterday. Today might be, just as you say, oh, I'm going to go back to bed. Or it could be the best me today, just going to ring Joanna to see how she is today.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be huge.
Yeah. So it's positive without being too pressureful.
Or I can decide what the best me of today is.
Yeah. Yeah. Make the choice.
Yeah. Because I'm awesome. I mean, not me, but but I think it's the whole thing of changing that philosophy. I have everything within me to be the best version of me. So what is the best version of me today?
Yeah, great. And having it on your mirror, so you have to kind of look at yourself while you do it.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Yes, it's on my mirror.
Brilliant. And my final question for you, Lizzy, although I'm sure we could talk for hours and hours and go into all the detail, I'm not sure everyone would want to listen to it for hours and hours. So we'll keep it nice and short and sweet for our listeners. Where can people come and find out more about you and your work and what you do?
Yes. Well, my name's quite unusual, so I think you very kindly said you put it in the show notes.
We'll put it in the show notes, yeah.
So by Googling that, you'll find me on LinkedIn and Facebook and so forth. My business is called Release Your Potential. So my website is rypotential.co.uk. And my email is lizzy@lypotential.co.uk. So that's probably the best ways to find me.
Brilliant. And
I do a lot of events on Eventbrite as well. So if you search Lizzy Bernthal on Eventbrite, then any of my events will come up too.
Brilliant. Well, Lizzy, it has been fantastic to speak to you. Thank you so much. Such an interesting story and career. And so many different stages of it that all kind of leads you to the point in time where you're helping others to make things happen and to feel great about what they do. And it's so great to hear from you.
Oh, it's been a joy. Thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Lizzy. Well, a huge thank you to Lizzy for coming on the podcast and sharing her incredible career story and also her practical advice. And I really love how practical some of these things are. I've got the image in my head right now of the coin on your desk, and when you're feeling in that zone of shoulding, or I must do this, or I'm not feeling great about it, think about what the other side of that coin, what the other side of that story could look like. I'm choosing to do this. I'm stepping into it. I'm choosing not to do something if that's not right for me. And I really loved her idea of that message on the mirror, looking at yourself first thing in the morning. How do I show up as the best version of me today, and not putting the pressure on what that looks like. And I think also this idea of thinking about who, not how. Who are the people, I mean, I would call it your squad in the WorkJoy world of things. Who are the people in your world? How do they help you? How do you help them? How do our relationships guide what we do versus how we go about doing them? So thank you to Dr. Lizzy Bernthal for being such a wonderful guest. We will put all of her details in the show notes so that you can go and click through and follow, like, get in touch, whatever you would love to do with Dr. Lizzy Bernthal. And also remember, within WorkJoy, we have the WorkJoy Jam podcast, which we are now on season 5. Plenty of episodes from lots of different people, different backgrounds, different careers, different experiences for you to listen to. I like to think of it as a bit of pick and mix, go through and see which ones might link to some of the things that you want to talk about, different subjects, and see which work for you. If you can, we would love it if you could go onto whichever podcasting app you're using to rate it and to leave a comment. That will really help more people get to see it, so we're really grateful for that. We also have the WorkJoy Way coaching program. If you're ever interested in that, just give me a shout. We have Club WorkJoy, which is a fantastic community of people who are all aiming to get more joy in their working lives. We have lots of different speakers and opportunities to ask me questions and group coaching and networking, lots of things going on in Club WorkJoy. And also, and this season I can talk to you about the fact that the WorkJoy book, A Toolkit to a Better Working Life, will be coming out in the new year. So in 2023, January 2023, you will be able to purchase the book. Would love you to see all of the advice and guidance is in there. It's a real practical toolkit for getting more joy at work. I am Beth Stallwood. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you really enjoyed it, and I will speak to you again soon.